Well, ladies and gentlemen, let's talk about the history of syllabus design. First of all, let's remember the definition of syllabus. A syllabus, ladies and gentlemen, is a framework for teaching that divides the content of learning into teachable elements and then sequences these into an effective order for teaching and learning. So basically, we select the contents that we're going to teach and we organize them in the best order so that we can be more effective. Now, before curriculum development, which started in the 1960s, syllabus design was the main source of concern for language teaching. That means that in the early 1900s and up to the 50s, people were mainly concerned with what to teach. Now, the decisions that they made concerning the contents of instruction were mainly empirical, which means that they did it just by the personal experience and based on intuition. Now, if syllabus refers to the content of a lesson, there are two basic questions to ask. The first one is what the teachers teach, and the second one, what's the focus of a lesson. Now, something interesting to mention is that even though syllabus design started in the 1900s, and in those times people were mainly concerned with grammar and vocabulary, today we can see that this is basically the same case. No matter how many teachers you ask, they will tell you when you ask them about the content of a lesson, either vocabulary items or grammatical structures or both. So let's talk about the first generation of ELT syllabuses in the 1900s and up to the 1950s. In those days, linguists were mainly structuralists and they were concerned about analyzing the language. They thought that language analysis was the best basis to design language teaching, because if you studied the language, you could see how it worked and therefore decipher the machinery or the mathematic formulas behind it. So this kind of thought was also responsible for the fact that the basic units of language were mainly vocabulary and grammar. That means that there were words and then rules to organize, to put together those words. This is what we call the linguistic or the formal or the generative transformation approach, which I also like to call the Lego approach, because it's just like putting little pieces together in order to create something. And finally, the last characteristic of the first generation of ELT syllabuses is that they consider that learners everywhere had the same needs. In other words, the contents were the same regardless of the needs and the characteristics of each group of learners. This is something that we call the general English approach, or as somebody will put it, teaching English for no obvious purpose. Thus, the early syllabuses basically were concerned with the selection of gradation of contents, what parts of the language should be taught, and in what order they should be taught. And basically, as I already mentioned, the main elements in the syllabuses were grammar and vocabulary. So they wanted to find out, to select appropriate vocabulary and grammar structures in order to teach them. Now let's talk about vocabulary. When we think about vocabulary for a syllabus, that means if I'm going to teach vocabulary, the questions that I have is like, how many words should I teach? And the second thing is, what kind of words should I teach? Now, in this regard, this question was addressed from different points of view. So by studying the number of words that an average educated native speaker can understand, which is about 17,000 words, people try to calculate what was a reasonable amount of words for second language learners or foreign language learners to learn. And some people said, what about 500 or 1,000 or 5,000? And after much analysis on the part of all of these famous linguists, they came up to the conclusion that 5,000 words gave a reasonable coverage for a person to be able to understand and get by in English. Now, the second question is which words to teach, and we'll address it on the next section. Now, what were the approaches to vocabulary selection? First of all, the tool that they mainly used was a text analysis. That means that they collected a number of different kinds of text in order to find out the frequency with which words appeared and also the range in which these words appear. That means how many times the word appear in a given text and also in how many different kinds of text the same word appeared. So this is basically what they decided to do. And based on that, they would select the words that were most frequent and also the ones that appear in the widest range of texts. There are advantages and disadvantages to this kind of selection. And I'm going to illustrate this with an example. If we look up these groups of words, in the first one we have time and year, people, way, man, day, and thing. The second group of words contains house and car and animal and tree and clothes and water and food. In the third group, I will include notebook and eraser and board and pencil and pen and computer and desk. And finally, in the last group, I have sit and jump and walk and run and head and hands and feet. Now, the question here is, which of these group of words would you teach first? Some people will say, well, I will probably teach notebook and eraser and board and pencil, pen and computer and desk first because they refer to things that are in the classroom, so I can show them easily, and also they need to use them because they are going to be in contact with these things. Some people will say, probably I can teach sit and jump and walk because I can demonstrate these actions. I can sit and I tell them sit and they can see the action, so it's easy to demonstrate. And in the same way, words like head and hands and feet can be easily explained by touching this part of the body with your hand and then showing what you're talking about. So they're very easy to demonstrate and they're easy to teach. And some other people will say, okay, what about teaching first the general words like house, because they all need to know what a house is, and a car, an animal, and tree, clothes, water, and food. These words refer to general concepts and the things that are necessary for people, so they can identify them quite easily. And the truth is that normally the last groups of words that appear at the beginning is the one that we will probably teach in the end. Because if you see, these words have little relationship with one another, and sometimes they refer to things that are difficult to conceptualize, such as way or day, or even though they seem to have like clear reference, they do not seem to be necessary for a person in the early stages of learning. But even though this list of words seems to be like the less priority for students, these are the words that are most frequently found in text according to the British National Corpus. So there is a disadvantage to the use of frequency and range, because not all of the words that are going to appear on text are the same ones that we use in everyday language. And also, the particular situation that you have in a classroom, the particular kind of learners, is going to influence that some words will be more priority than others in any different kind of situation. Now, seeing the limitations of the frequency and range approach, some additional criteria for vocabulary selection were developed. And first of all, we have teachability. Are words easy to demonstrate? This will be the case of words such as jump, or head, or hand, or walk, because they can be easily taught by demonstration. The second criterion is similarity. And in this case, the question is, do words resemble to first language words? And you have to remember that in those days, there was also contrastive analysis. So people consider that the more related two languages were, it was easy for a person to learn the other language. And if two languages were very different, it was difficult to learn them. In this case, for example, people said we can learn Italian more easily if we're Spanish speakers because Spanish and Italian are very similar. But if you speak Spanish and you want to learn Japanese, it is going to be more difficult. So anyway, words that are cognate such as medicine, medicina, technique, técnica, computer, computadora, all of these words that are similar can also be taught at the beginning because they are easy to identify and remember. Another thing is the availability. So in this case, we ask ourselves if the references are present or visible in the immediate classroom environment. And this will be the case of words such as eraser or board or pencil or computer, because all of these objects are going to be in the classroom. They're going to be easy to show. The students are going to need to talk about them because in the classroom environment these words will be necessary, and that's why they can also be taught earlier. Another criterion is coverage and defining power. So in this case, we're going to try to teach first the words that are general in the sense that they include the meaning of other words, or words that define other words. For example, seat includes chair and bench and stool. And in the list that we had, there was animal. For example, animal includes dog and cat and fish. So it's like a general word that is very useful to learn at the beginning, because in that case you can express yourselves using one single word instead of learning many words. And finally, the last criterion is the communicative need. And in this case, we need to ask ourselves if the students will need these words immediately. This seems to be the case for words such as bathroom, for example, and same thing, eraser and board and all of the classroom based language, because the students will be in contact with words, but also they're going to need to use them. So if they need to use the words, we're going to teach them first. So by compiling and putting together groups of words, linguists created what we call lexical syllabuses. That means groups of words that are important to teach. And one of the best examples is Michael West's General Service List of English Words, which was published in 1953. This was a very important guide because it helped teachers and textbook publishers to develop the early English language courses. And so today, we have different kinds of words that need to be included in a basic lexical syllabus. First of all, of course, we include basic nouns, such as names referring to common activities, places, people, situations, and events. And we also include basic adjectives, such as words that communicate everyday positive and negative evaluations of things, people, places, events, and so on. And of course, also, there will be basic verbs for actions and events, and basic adverbs. That means words that refer to time, frequency, habituality. A lexical syllabus will also include modal items. That means words that describe different degrees of necessity or certainty, as well as dual lexical verbs, which have very little lexical content but are very frequent. And of course, we need to include stance words such as the ones that communicate the speaker's attitude towards something, and discourse markers, which are very useful to organize and monitor the progress of our talk. And last but not least, general deictics. That means that words that relate the speaker to the world in terms of time and space. So this is a brief history of how the early syllabuses were designed, and later we'll see what corresponds to the grammatical selection and grading. Thanks a lot for your attention, and see you next time.